A 2-ton SUV, thrown 3/4 of a mile through the air, and it slammed into a water tower so hard it left a permanent dent in the steel before bouncing off. That happened on April 27, 2011, in a Mississippi town most people had never heard of, Smithville. A dot on the map you'd drive past without blinking. Fewer than 1,000 people lived there, and in less than a minute, most of it was gone. This is the detail that's hard to process. This tornado wasn't crawling. It was moving close to 60 miles per hour, highway speed. You picture the worst storms as slow monsters that grind a town into dust over long, screaming minutes. This one did it while sprinting across the ground. Storm chasers still argue it was the strongest tornado ever recorded on Earth. Not officially, but the damage tells a story numbers alone can't. So how does a fast-moving wind pick up a car and throw it like a pebble? It started at 3:42 in the afternoon, along the Tennessee-Tombigbee Waterway. A funnel dropped and touched Mississippi soil. 3 minutes. That's all it took. By 3:45, the storm had reached the center of Smithville at full strength. Full strength meaning an EF5, the highest rating a tornado can earn. There is nothing above it, nothing stronger on the scale. This was the second EF5 to strike Mississippi since 1966, touching down just an hour after another monster storm that same afternoon. 2 generations lived their whole lives in that state, without seeing the worst nature can do. Then, one Wednesday afternoon, it showed up at their door. The whole thing lasted 41 minutes on the ground, finally dying out near Hodges, Alabama at 4:23. 41 minutes of a machine that shouldn't exist tearing across 2 states. But those first 3 minutes over Smithville? That's where the real horror lived. So what were people up against? Winds estimated at 205 miles per hour. Now be careful here. No radar clocked that number directly. Scientists read it backward, from the wreckage the storm left behind. And the wreckage screamed. Take that Ford Explorer. The wind grabbed it, hauled it half a mile through open air, and rammed it into the town water tower. The steel buckled. Then the storm wasn't finished. The SUV bounced off the tower and was flung another 1/4 mile. 3/4 of a mile in total. Do the math on that. A vehicle weighing 2 tons tossed the length of 11 football fields like it weighed nothing at all. That's physics with no mercy, not a freak accident. And the SUV was one of the gentler stories. This really tells you how bad it got. The houses, not damaged, not roofless, gone. Well-built, 2-story homes, bolted to their foundations, simply swept away. What was left behind? Bare concrete slabs. Clean, like someone had come along and lifted the house right off. 117 buildings and homes in Smithville, erased. Think about how a house is put together. Nails, beams, anchor bolts, tons of weight pressing down toward the earth. Now imagine wind strong enough to lift all of that and scatter it into the next county. That's the difference between a bad storm and this one. The total damage came to $14.4 million, which for a town that small was nearly everything it owned. Buildings you can rebuild, though. The people who died, you can't. And their stories are the ones that stay with you. Carla Jones was 37 years old. When the wind hit her home, she didn't run. She threw her own body over 2 children, her niece Emily Jo Pearson and her nephew Josh Pearson. She became a shield, a human wall against a force that tossed cars like toys. When the tornado swept the house away, Carla was thrown and killed. Both children lived. They came out with skull fractures, alive, because a woman chose them over herself in the last seconds she had. She had no time to plan, no warning to prepare, just instinct and love and a choice made in a single heartbeat. That's the whole reason this story matters, not just a line in a report. Behind every name on that list, there was a moment exactly like Carla's. Then there's Roy and Ruth Estes, married. Roy was 63, Ruth was 61. When the storm ripped into their home, Roy grabbed his wife and held on. Held her as tight as a man can hold anyone. And the wind tore her out of his arms anyway. Picture that. You're holding the person you love most, using every bit of strength you have, and it isn't close to enough. They found Ruth nearby. She was gone. Roy hung on through the night, then died next day from his injuries. Decades together, ended in the space of a few seconds. That's what this kind of wind does. It doesn't care how tight you hold on. And the storm wasn't done playing cruel tricks, because it started moving the dead. This sounds made up. It isn't. Heavy granite headstones in the local cemetery were snapped and hurled through the air, and they landed in the opposite direction of the main wind. Opposite. How? Because inside the giant tornado, there were smaller whirls spinning their own way, little tornadoes riding inside the big one. That's how you get stone thrown backward against the flow. One family survived the whole ordeal, huddled inside their home, and then a granite tombstone came smashing through their window. It belonged to a man named Gavin Camiolo, a resident who had already passed, whose grave marker the storm ripped up and threw into the home of the living. Imagine living through the worst day of your life, then finding a stranger's headstone in your living room. How hard did the wind push down? It hit the ground itself, not just the town above it. As the tornado raced through open fields, it carved a trench into the dirt, up to a foot deep. A foot. Wind digging a ditch like a plow blade. And this part gets me. That trench stayed visible in aerial photographs for more than a year. Long after the debris was hauled off, long after people started rebuilding their lives, you could look down from space and still see the scar cut into the earth. The land itself remembered. Most tornadoes leave broken buildings. This one drew a permanent line across Mississippi, deep enough to spot from orbit. Now hold on, because one famous piece of this story got twisted in the telling. You might read that this tornado ripped a heavy steel drainage pipe clean out of the ground. Sounds terrifying, right? It's also false. What actually happened is far more ordinary. Road crews dug that pipe up after the storm to clear the road so help could get through. The wind didn't pull it out. Cleanup did. And that matters, because when a disaster is this real, you don't need to invent anything. The facts are already more than enough. Same goes for that 205-mile-per-hour figure. It's an estimate drawn from the damage, not a reading off some machine. And people still call Smithville the strongest tornado in recorded history. Is it? Officially, there's no such crown. That's a debate, not a fact. But the case they make is hard to wave away. So why do storm experts keep pointing at this one? It comes down to the clock. Most violent tornadoes take their time flattening a town. Long minutes of grinding destruction. Smithville did it in less than 20 seconds, while charging forward at 70 miles per hour. That combination is startling. Maximum damage, minimum time. A town center flattened before you could finish tying your shoes. 137 people were injured along the path. 23 lost their lives, 16 in Smithville and 7 across the border in Alabama. All of it before the storm finally lifted. When something does that much harm that fast, the strongest ever argument stops sounding like hype. It starts sounding like a serious question with no clean answer. So what happens to a town after something like this? You'd think it just fades off the map. Smithville didn't. The people stayed. They rebuilt. Remember Emily Pearson, the little girl Carla shielded with her own body? She grew up. In May 2025, Emily graduated from high school in the same town that was nearly wiped away. And she announced what she wants next. She's going to become a teacher. A child who lived only because her aunt made an impossible choice, now planning to spend her life helping other kids learn. That's Carla's decision echoing forward, 14 years later, into a classroom that doesn't exist yet. In April 2026, Smithville marked 15 years since that afternoon. A memorial, a moment to say the names out loud. Roy and Ruth, Carla, every person lost that day. And people get one thing wrong about this storm. They obsess over the SUV in the water tower, the trench you can see from space, the headstones thrown backward by tornadoes spinning inside a tornado. All hard to believe, all true. But the real measure of April 27, 2011 is a woman who became a shield, not windsped. A husband who held on until the wind was stronger than he was. A town of fewer than 1,000 people that refused to disappear. The strongest tornado on Earth? Maybe, maybe not. That title will always be an argument. What's not up for debate is what those 10 seconds cost and who those people chose to be when the sky came apart.